Thank you, Madam Chair. We're going to move into our elementary rezoning presentation, and as I tee this up, this is going to be a joint effort being led by Dr. Snett Bird, our Chief of Schools. We will begin the presentation with Mr. Waller, our school board attorney, who's going to give a historical perspective. Dr. Bird will then provide information related to reasons for some of the change. Mr. Littlefield, our Director of Technology, will be able to show potential new school boundaries. I do want to let our school community and our school board know this is going to be a multiple month process. Having conversations with both Chair Jenkins and Vice Chair Howell. We're looking potentially to have some action from the board, kind of circling the month of June for this. We will also end up having community outreach as well as school level town halls that we're going to ask our board members to be able to join for any schools that are affected within your borough. These will be led by the principal as well as central office staff to be able to support. That's going to be our opportunity to collect information from our school communities as we're going to ask for an adjustments to be made with school boundaries. Also keeping in mind that, as Mr. Waller will explain, this will also address some transportation concerns as well as issues with our M2M program. So with that being said, I'll turn over to Dr. Bird, our Chief of Schools.
Thank you, Dr. Gordon. And greetings, Chair Jenkins, Vice Chair Howell, members of the school board, Dr. Gordon, and our viewing guests. Before we begin our presentation, I'd like to provide a brief overview of desegregation efforts in Suffolk, Virginia. Suffolk, like many communities across the United States, underwent significant changes during the civil rights movement era, particularly in the realm of education. Once upon a time, Suffolk was deeply entrenched in segregation practices with separate facilities for African Americans and whites, including schools. The landmark Supreme Court case Brown versus Board of Education in 1954 declared segregation in public schools unconstitutional, setting the stage for desegregation efforts nationwide. While significant progress has been made, we still have schools with demographic representations that are not aligned with the demographic breakdown of our city. Through it all, our commitment to ensuring equitable education for all students remains steadfast. As you can see here from the agenda, the next item will be Attorney Waller will talk about some information from the Department of Justice. Then I will come back and share the current demographics and the rationale for the schools that we selected. And next, Mr. Littlefield will show you some maps and give you an idea of what things may look like. And then I will be back to close us out.
First question to be asked is, how did we get here? On May 27, 1970, the United States filed a lawsuit against the Nassau County School Board and its school superintendent. The suit alleged that the school board maintained a dual system of public schools. At that time, there were 8 schools, traditionally maintained for white students and staffed by white teachers. There were 10 schools traditionally maintained for black students and staffed by black teachers. On October the 18th, 1971, the Federal District Court entered an order approving the school board's school desegregation plan. The school board's plan addressed student assignment, faculty and staff assignment, transportation, and other aspects of school operations. On December the 8th, 1971, this case was consolidated with the case of Walston versus County School Board of Nassau County. Walston and several other named plaintiffs had filed suit alleging that the school board discriminated against teachers and principals in its hiring and employment practices on the basis of race. After a successful appeal to the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, the court enjoined the school board from discriminating on the basis of race or color in the employment of teachers and other personnel, and from making use of the NTE as an employment requirement without proper validation, studies, and job analysis. On May 24th, 1978, the court removed both cases from the court's active docket, with leave for any party upon motion to have the case reinstated. After the court entered its order on May 24th, 1978, removing both cases, there was no further activity on either case. Then we get to 2009. While reviewing the school's compliance with its desegregation obligations, the DOJ, Department of Justice, learned that the school board was planning to construct a new school, Pioneer, now Southwestern. On December the 18th, 2014, the federal district court granted a joint motion filed by the parties to reopen the school desegregation case and have the case reinstated to the court's active docket. In January 2014, the school board shared two proposed rezoning plans for the new elementary school. The DOJ could not agree to the rezoning plans because they failed to materially further desegregation. So what happened next? The school board agreed with the DOJ to have the court enter a consent order that would modify the school board's student assignment plan to account for the Southwestern School. This plan went into effect the 2014-2015 school year, and the plan introduced what is known as the Majority to Minority Program, M-to-M. The M-to-M program would allow Black students who were attending schools that had a high percentage of Black students to attend schools that had a high percentage of white students and vice versa. The M-to-M program has remained in effect beginning with the 2014-2015 school year and is expected to remain through the 2024-25 school year. Students that attend schools that have a high percentage of Black students, Booker T. Washington, Elephants Fork, and McBean Jr., are allowed to attend Southwestern, which has a high percentage of white students, under this M-to-M program. For the 2014-2015 school year, there were 78 students attending Southwestern under this M-to-M program. For this current school year, 24-25, there are 116 students attending Southwestern under the M-to-M program. This number has increased each year since the program's inception, and it places an enormous burden on transportation and will eventually result in the overcrowding of Southwestern Elementary School. The only viable option to addressing the racial disparity in certain schools is to consider rezoning at the elementary level. What is it that we're hoping to achieve? The end result is to have the federal court declare that Suffolk Public Schools has achieved unitary status. This means that the school division has fulfilled its duties and its obligations and has eliminated vestiges of a prior dual system of racial segregation. The U.S. Supreme Court has identified 6 areas commonly known as the green factors that must be considered as part of this determination. And those factors include student assignment, which also includes student discipline, faculty hiring, staff assignments, transportation, extracurricular activities, and facilities. By order of the Federal District Court that was entered in March of 2017, the court found that the school board has achieved unitary status by eliminating vestiges of prior dual system of racial segregation in some of its areas. The areas included faculty hiring, staff assignments, extracurricular activities, transportation, and facilities. The only area that remains unresolved before Suffolk Public Schools can achieve unitary status is student assignments. The rezoning of the elementary schools will address this remaining area.
When rezoning, several key considerations must be taken into account to ensure an equitable and effective process. There's population distribution, capacity and utilization, geographic boundaries, demographic diversity, transportation, impact on the community, educational equity, long-term planning, and legal and regulatory compliance. As a result of the aforementioned considerations, we recommend the rezoning of 7 elementary schools. As you can see from the chart, Booker T. Washington, Elephants Fork, Mac Bend, and Southwest Elementary School are schools whose demographic breakdown least reflects that of our city. However, in order to resolve the items highlighted by Attorney Waller, while taking into consideration school capacity, geographic features, impact on transportation, we recommend modifying the 7 schools represented in this chart. On the next slide, Mr. Littlefield will provide a visual representation of the zoning recommendation along with the impact it will have on our division.
Good evening. I want to go through and just sort of give you some highlights of the zone comparison. These are side by side. So on your left is our current zones, and on your right are our proposed zones. You will not see any changes to Northern Shores, Creekside, Florence Bowser, or Oakland Elementary Schools. Those zones and student attendance will remain the same. That also includes for Florence Bowser the area of Hollywood, which is in the downtown area of Suffolk. Those students currently attend Florence Bowser as one of the non-contiguous zones that we have. And that, with the new proposed zone, that will be the only non-contiguous zone boundary we have. So just sort of to go through this, we're going to try and respect natural boundaries, railroad tracks. We don't want to send buses across railroad tracks and things like that. Neighborhoods, we looked at all the neighborhoods in this area, so we're not dividing a neighborhood in half or pulling part of the students out of these neighborhoods. The biggest change that you see is in the Booker T, which is this sort of salmon colored. Let me get the mouse over here so you can see it. The area right here, this is Booker T Elementary Zone. The green currently is Southwestern Elementary Zone, formerly Pioneer Elementary School. As we go around clockwise, this is Kilby Shores. The next one up is Elephants Fork. We're not going to do anything with Oakland. Coming around Nansemond Parkway, Mac Bend, and then around over here to Booker T. Hill Point is sort of in the middle, right here, the light blue. The biggest change in this zone is two components. The southern part of the city, Desert Road, and Booker T looks very large because of the Dismal Swamp. We have to take respect. 90% of that area down there is the Great Dismal Swamp. So that makes it look sort of slighted. We also respect railroad tracks. They're sort of hard to see up here, but these straight lines are railroad tracks. We have a lot of railroads in Suffolk. The other component is rivers and bridges and such. Southwestern, we come down the railroad track that leads down Carolina Road. In that area, we hook around and follow some of the natural property boundaries. We look at the shape file for our parcels in the city and follow those around down to the Carolina line and back across North Carolina, up the Southampton border, all the way up on the new zone to the railroad track that's just north of Deer Path Indian Trail area. We come back down the railroad track and we follow part of the old Kilby Shore zone down around to the next railroad track that runs back into downtown. That's probably the biggest change in the zoning. We did, and it's very difficult to see on the map, but right in the middle here, this little yellow area is Hollywood. That's what we refer to that's going to Florence Bowser. Elephants Fork, We did correct, when we worked at the zoning, we did not respect the railroad track in our former rezoning, so we moved that boundary up. It made sense for transportation purposes to include those students in the new southwestern zone. It's a very small number of students, but it makes sense for transportation. And then downtown, we basically, if we zoomed in on this, we don't have a zoomed in picture, you would see it sort of looks like we've carved pieces of downtown, and that goes to all of those 7 schools. So everybody shares in that. The only other significant change that we see is in the MAC-Ben zone. If you look over at the current zones, it's larger. MAC-Ben is at or over capacity currently. So we were looking at capacity for these schools, and we had to do something there. The growth right there behind MAC-Ben Elementary School has been exponential. That neighborhood has brought an immense number of students into the school. So we did have to adjust that zone to send some of those students to Nansemond Parkway. There's space in Nansemond Parkway. So that's sort of the comparison. As Dr. Bird alluded to, these are proposed zones, so we didn't want to get down into the nitty-gritty details of each one. On the next slide, we get into our current makeup of the schools. We show the capacity calculation for the school for each of the 7 schools that were discussed, which is Booker T, Elvins Fork, Hill Point, Kilby Shores, MAC-Ben, Nansemond Parkway, and Southwestern. Those 7 schools all will be affected by the rezoning. If you sort of notice, we highlighted the significant ethnic differences. So Booker T, 78.5% Afro-American students, and then 14% white. And I'm just going to hit the highlighted ones. The same at MAC-Ben, we're at 73.3. Again, 18%. And then at Southwestern, it's the flip. We're 28.1% and 60% white students at Southwestern. These are the issues that Mr. Waller referred to that we are not in compliance with. And so one of the goals is we looked at the capacity of buildings and the ethnic makeup. And how could we adjust these zones to balance out the best we can? Because there's no perfect magic solution to this because of our city size, lakes, rivers, railroad tracks, just all sorts of number of things, neighborhoods. On the right, you'll see our proposed zones. Again, the capacity, trying to maintain capacity within the boundaries of the buildings, and what the new zone, and when we look at the JK pre-K student population, those students, we can't predict where they're going to come from, and so we are using the numbers that we currently have today for those students, and then the rest of the students are in the new zone. So JK pre-K, you may not be in your attended school zone currently. Same thing will be applied in the future. So these are the numbers that represent these schools. The significant piece here is if you look down the column, all our schools, with the exception of MAC-Ben, are relatively close to our ethnic makeup of the division, which is approximately 58% Black Afro-American, and somewhere in the neighborhood of 34% white students. Other has changed over the few years in the last, since we did this rezoning significantly, so it's not as shown up here, but it's not a big factor on there. All of those are typically in the 10% neighborhood. So you'll see all those are there. MAC-Ben, if you notice, we are actually under capacity there, so that's a school that potentially may receive some additional JK pre-K students, use some of the space in the building. Coming on down, Southwestern, we're pretty much balanced there, ethnic balanced at that school, and that is one of the goals that the Department of Justice wanted to see a change there. And I'll just let you sort of look at these numbers for all the schools. All right, our next slide, we're going to talk about who's affected by this. And we're only looking at K-3 students for the students that are affected. Because idea is the 25-26 school year, we would implement this. That's 2 years out, so your 4th and 5th graders would have already moved on to middle school, hopefully. So your K-3 students are the only current students that would be affected by this, plus the new kindergarten, 1st grade students over the 2 years. Booker T, biggest change. So you see 181 students will change school. They will either go to Southwestern or another school. Coming on down, you look at Hill Point, another change. And Hill Point's change is not as dramatic as it appears. There's a neighborhood area, Kojic Square, that currently goes to Hill Point. It just made a lot of sense to send those students to Booker T, extremely short transportation route, instead of sending them all the way to Hill Point Elementary, which basically goes back through downtown and across the city. So That's the majority of those students. The rest of them, Kilby Shores, those are some of those students that are out changing in the downtown area. They're moving, and some of them are used to be, will now go to the southwestern area just because of the logistics of it. Mac Bend, we've already talked about, but it's 146 students. Nansemond Parkway, 112, and in Southwestern, 171. And those 171 are the students in that southern area that now, in the new plan, would go to Booker T. So that's in that southern area. If you look, the number of students that do not have change, 100 students roughly at Booker T, almost 300 students at Elvins Fork, 350 students at Hill Point, 139 at Kilby Shores, 267 at Mac Bend, 157 at Nansemond Parkway, and 210 at Southwestern. All this data is based on today's enrollment. We snapshotted the data in February. Things change. These numbers may fluctuate up or down a little bit as time goes on. I think that's as far as I've gone. And Dr. Bird, I'm going to switch over to you. Yes, sir.
So as you can see here, our next steps are to hold informational sessions at various locations and seek community feedback. If the board votes to proceed with rezoning for the 25-26 school year, we will begin the process of planning for change. In order to address concerns that may arise as we go through a period of change, we will be sure to have transparent communication throughout the process, engage our stakeholders, educate about the educational benefits, address community concerns, ensure equity, provide support services, promote transparency and accountability, build trust, offer options for feedback, and monitor and evaluate the process. And finally, in closing, I just want to once again just restate that if the rezoning is realized, it is not for next year, it is for the 25-26 school year. This concludes our presentations. Any questions?
Thank you so much, Dr. Bird. So to piggyback on some of the main points, we also want to let the board and the school community know that Mr. Privet, our Director of Transportation, was also heavily involved in assisting us in developing these potential proposed lines. As we know, at the elementary level, transportation has been a concern, especially with doublebacks. And as Mr. Riddick, as a former driver, was shaking his head earlier, we took a hard look at the shortest routes. We believe that with these proposed zones, we may be able to reduce our routes by 10 to 15 minutes in some cases, as well as to make sure that we're not passing an existing school to go to any of our proposing schools. That was one of our main rules that we took a look at. Also, I want to make this clear because I can see this coming down the road. Us doing this rezoning does not change the need for our capital improvement plan. The capital improvement plan is based on the conditions of our schools and not the capacity of our schools. One of the things that you did see, however, is we are very comfortable in reducing the enrollment at Elephants Fork Elementary Schools, which has one of our largest cottage of mobile units, as we like to call it. We believe that doing this will reduce that capacity by about 100, maybe 125 students, depending on what happens in 25-26, so that we will have less mobile units that will be needed there. As Mr. Littlefield also said, we took in consideration our pre-K population. That does change year to year, but with the addition of an additional pre-K class at Booker T, it may allow us to be able to shift some students that may have attended Southwestern Elementary School to make sure that we're going to be at capacity there. We did see growth in the Hill Point Elementary School zone. That's another area we're going to take a look at our pre-K schools, our pre-K classrooms, but this is going to be an ongoing discussion. And the last thing, Madam Chair, that before I turn it back over to you, our staff has a lot of institutional knowledge of the last time that we had rezoning. And I do want to go on the record and say that we're going to ask for our school communities to be very collegial and collaborative when it comes to this. Words matter when it comes to talking about individual students as well as neighborhoods. We are going to take all feedback into consideration. It is going to be the board's decision based on recommendations that are coming from staff or any adjustments that they're seeing. Every piece of feedback we get, we're going to take a look. When we get further down this road, Mr. Littlefield and the team will have a list of the neighborhoods that will be affected to make sure that everyone has that knowledge when it comes to the discussion as well as making decisions. So I just wanted to put that on the record, Madam Chair, and now I turn it back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone who presented. It's clear that, you all see what was coming down the pipe from DOJ, and you saw the need, you observed, you've investigated, you set plans, and you brought it forth to us, and you put everybody in it for consideration of what will happen if we do this, what will happen if we do that, what will happen if we don't do this. So I appreciate your insight in what you all have done, and it is our responsibility to make sure that we make the best choice. And what is so important that you've done, you've made sure that you're going to make it possible that our students, as well as the parents, our staff, everybody will have an input, because you're going to make that available with your town halls, just to say town halls, and I think you're going to do it in every district. Every school, to make sure. So we need our parents. If you're, a lot of them were here earlier, but they're high school students who will be gone, but they may have other students in school. So if you're listening on YouTube, and if you're here later on for our 7 o'clock meeting, those meetings are going to be for you to give us your input, because we need it, we want it, and we're making it available for you. So thank you so much for that information. Do we have anyone that wants to say anything from the board?
I have some questions.
Okay,
Okay.
2 questions. No, that's just how it is. It's 2 questions, and then we'll go around.
Oh, okay. The question I want to ask, firstly, is have we considered rezoning fully versus just to satisfy, because if you're going to upset the hornet's nest, you might as well do it to get rid of the mobile units and see how we can relieve capacity throughout the district versus just to check a box to remove us from the Department of Justice order. The reason I bring it up is because there's an area in Hollywood that still pass 2 schools to get to an already school that is 17, a couple of students away from being overcrowded. I mean, is it a way? Because once upon a time, we paid for a study to rezone the whole school to get division to get rid of mobile units. So that's question 1. Have we considered rezoning the entire school division to get rid of mobile units and to relieve capacity?
So to answer your question, Mr. Rick, yes, we did take a look at that, and you're right. I believe the study was done, I think, the 2017-2018 school year with a net of approximately 50 students that were going to be on the move. I know from your conversation that you had at your town hall that you had taken some questions from the floor to basically balance out our high schools, since there are fewer students at Lakelands compared to Nansemond River and Kings Fork. Part of our plan at the high school level was part of the reason why we started the Center for Performing and Production Arts, with the final goal of being able to increase the enrollment at Lakeland High School by 200, a goal of 50 students per year. Our only middle school right now that is 2 of our middle schools that are close to capacity really is Colonel Fred Cherry. We still have approximately 156 at Kings Fork Middle School, so we didn't see a need there. With the completion of the new John F. Kennedy Middle School, as you know, the areas that you have discussed in the past with an 800-seat capacity, we know that we'll have plenty of room there. So we did talk about it. But we figured that the biggest impact, because one of the things I did forget to say, and pardon me, Mr. Riddick, is this is a Department of Justice basically decision. I want our school community to know that this isn't something that the school board came up with. This isn't something that staff came up with. And we know that anytime we do rezoning, it becomes extremely political, and we didn't want to create any additional drama that we did not have to. And so the focus on the elementary level was because, as Mr. Waller mentioned and Dr. Byrd mentioned, was to bring the demographics closer to the overall division demographics. This might be something that we may have to look at, however, Mr. Riddick, if our city does not come through with our needs within our capital improvement plan, especially the expansion of Nansemond River High School, the rebuilding of Elephants Fork Elementary School. We are concerned that since that is still several years down the road, and potentially, we are going to help with the overcrowding, as Mr. Littlefield said in Mac Bend. That was an immediate need that we discussed at our last joint meeting. So, no, that's kind of a long answer to your question, but I did want to be able to provide some background on that.
Madam Chair, the first initial question was really just rezoning for all elementary schools. I mean, I already knew, based from our conversations about the middle and high school and how we were working with that. It's just my concern is the elementary schools, which brings me to my, as far as rezoning all of our elementary schools, because you have Creekside has a capacity of 903 students, but they are at 886 students, which is 17 students away from being over capacity. And then you have room at Nansemond Parkway. So if we rezone, I think we can dance a little bit to alleviate a stress system. But that goes to my next question. In the midst of this, have we considered the pipeline development according to the city of Suffolk's economic development growth? Far as the growth zone, neighborhoods that already have been approved to be built in these areas. Because this is what I was referencing at our last joint meeting. We're speaking two separate languages, school board, city council, and we're making decisions to do what we feel was best for us, but there's decisions that's also being made as what's best for the city. But because we're not speaking the same language, one end is being slighted unintentionally. So my recommendation is for us to go and look at the pipeline development, especially that development that had already been approved. For an example, and I'm going to shut up after this one. Everyone looks at the growth at Hill Point, and people are saying the city is growing too fast. They're just building all these houses overnight. However, the Hill Point corridor was planned and approved in the late 90s. And they reduced the amount of houses that it was initially approved for. So if we're going to rezone, I think that's a very vital piece for us to consider. And Madam Chair, I request that Elephant Fork is added to the agenda as far as the joint meeting coming up, because the numbers don't lie. That's what our next issue. So my question is, and I'm close here, have we considered the pipeline development that is approved already and that is currently in queue waiting for a decision?
Yeah, I'll take that question too. Thank you, Mr. Riddick. To answer your question, yes, we did consider the pipeline development, which is part of the reason why you have seen some shifts based on some of the neighborhoods, why there's now going to be, even though it's 10 more students space at Mac Bend, for an example. We also took in consideration the facility study that the city is aware of. Part of the reason, to answer your other question, that we did not take a look at Florence Bowser Elementary Schools, because we needed the neighborhood of Hollywood to keep the demographics close, but also because Florence Bowser was the only elementary school at that time on a facility study that was projected to be overcrowded within the next 5 years. So as the proffers come in, Mr. Napier informs us, we take a look at what the capacity is. Dr. Pichon at the elementary level gets projections based on the birth rate. You've seen presentations and conversations that we've had about the UDO, and Ms. Jenkins had already decided that we were going to try to make this a part of the discussions at the joint meeting. So I think you all on the same page there.
Thank you. Anyone else? Let me go to Dr. Buck. Oh, Ms. Brown. Sorry.
I'm old. I can't see very well, even when I put my glasses on. These little maps, there's a lot of territory down where I live, down south, And one of my questions would be, could we have larger detailed maps? Because as soon as this hits the news, when Mr. Robinson writes his article, I'm going to have a lot of people concerned in my area, which is the yellow area here. And they're going to say, is my road included? And I can't tell from this information where we are drawing or considering to draw lines, and I can't answer any questions. And we're going to have thousands of those questions. So, I need better maps that give more details. Streets, you're talking about neighborhoods, but we have streets. We don't have neighborhoods where I live. I don't believe Dr. Brittingham would disagree with me on that.
Yes, ma'am, I do agree with you.
The same
Yes.
thing with hers. People are going to be asking those questions. I would like to know where Route 13 is on this map. That's another question I have. And I guess Mr. Littlefield can explain that, maybe.
Yes, I was just going to return it over to Mr. Littlefield, and also he's given me the nod that he can get those maps designed for you.
Right.
Of course, for the purpose of a presentation tonight, it can overwhelm you with a lot of information, but.
Right.
let's just speak to it.
But I do know that a lot of parents are going to want to see those maps. When we have these meetings, they're going to need to see these maps so that they can understand what's going on. And I thank you for that, Dr. Burke.
Ms. Byram, to address that particular question, and I think Ms. Brittingham as well. In the past, when we do these, we do sort of a general overview at this point, and then we do focus group meetings, as may be referred to as town halls, where we do a much more zoomed-in version of the maps and go through things and discuss the streets and names and such. To do that at this point is probably very premature. So when we have those town halls and get that input, we can zoom in on the maps, provide you the detail on those. We are a big city, 426 square miles. To do a zoomed-in map to give you that level of detail, you're going to have hundreds of pages. But we can certainly provide those, and if we're doing something in your borough, we'll zoom in on those sections, provide the details of the streets. And I know in the past we've provided zoomed-in maps that we've published online as we've moved down this path.
I have one other thing. May I ask, Madam Chair?
Yeah, go ahead, you have one more?
Okay, so if this proposal goes into effect 25-26, correct, Attorney Wilder? I have a question for you. So I know I'm going to get this question, so
That is
up until
correct.
that time, M to M will exist.
That's correct.
But after that, if this goes into effect, M and M will not exist, right?
That's right. M to M would go away.
That's right. Because I know I'm going to get 100 questions on that. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Madam
Mr.
Chair.
Wallen, would you stay there for a minute? Because I have a couple of questions as well. The first is with the I guess the premise of when we were here, when we developed the M&M process before, it was to respond to this. And in developing the process, somebody talked about the school overcrowding. Because for M&M, we couldn't overcrowd because the condition was we could take students as long as there was space. So when I heard that the school would overcrowd, I don't quite understand that. So that would be part of it. But I guess my question is there a timeline for when this has to be done? And when I ask my second one, you'll know why. Is there a timeline for when we have to do this? Is this why we're trying to do it in 25, 26?
One of the things that the Department of Justice has done since the M to M program has been in place is each year they have put more pressure on us to increase the numbers. Because even though with this current year we're looking at 116 students, they believe that we still need more black students at Southwestern. So even when we have said to them, we are concerned about capacity, they still push us to add more students, to make room for them, even if that means reducing some of the out-of-zone approvals that we now do. For example, we allow for employees to send their students to schools out of their zone. We also allow for childcare out of zone. And so the DOJ has consistently put pressure on us about those outer zones because they take up seats that students could have under the M to M. And we have not been willing at this stage to do away with the outer zone process. So one of the other things that has happened with all of this is that whenever we've added a student in because of the out of zone, they have always required us to also bring in an M to M. So for every out of zone, we've had to bring in an M to M. So that has led to this increased number, which could inadvertently lead to overcrowding. Now, for your second question about whether or not this has to be done now,
Second, that was part of the first. The second is another one.
right. Oh, that was part of your first question. I got it. The reason why it's probably important to try to address it now is because we're constantly getting the pressure to add more students. And we know the burden this is placing on transportation. And so at some point, we've got to do something. And so we figure now is the time to try to do it.
Other question is for whomever needs to answer it. We constantly have the pressure to provide choice, and that's why we did the M&M, so that we'd have choice options. And we developed our programs, our focus programs at our high schools, our pathways programs, and then our music program, and the other things that we've tried to do to get people to voluntarily go, because that's much easier than cutting it up into a pie and sending people places. But I guess the bigger question for me is if we're building new schools, now we're talking about Elephants Fork, where we have a critical need. And then we're talking about, not Mac Bend, but Kilby Shores, where we have critical needs in Raggedy schools. If we're going to take Kilby Shores and put Kilby Shores, as we discussed before, beside Forest Glen, because we have land out there we don't have to buy and redo them, then we're going to have to turn around and redo them when we build schools. So it sounds like, to me, we need more schools in areas, just to me, okay? We need more schools in areas than to keep shaking up people and trying to move them places, because our schools are overcrowded, and Northern Shores has been overcrowded in the last 25 years since I've lived there. It's been overcrowded. So, I mean, we're not talking about some options that we have. So I'm concerned about, at this point, where we're talking about building schools and putting schools in different places and then moving parents from place to place, where it's going to be World War II, and then we'll have to move them again when we build the schools. Is there an answer somewhere?
Yeah, I mean, kind of. The Kilby Shores example, we actually are going to decrease the enrollment there with this proposal by 36 students. So that's about 2 classes. You're right with what we've had conversations about putting Kilby Shores on the same campus site with Forest Glen. But one of the things that we will probably end up doing is showing how the elementary school boundaries are actually within the middle school boundary. So you won't have to make any adjustments there. Part of the reason why I made that comment about it's really more with our capital improvement plan about the conditions of schools and not the capacity is because we are trying to address the 2 main capacity issues that we saw, Mac Bend and Elephants Fork. And both of those, well, Mac Bend's not even on the radar, but as I said earlier, Elephants Fork is about 4 to 5 years away before construction even begins. So once the board makes their decision on the boundary, if there's any discussion from the city on improving the location, like there's a discussion potentially on changing the location of Elephants Fork because of the one-way in, one-way out, one of the things that I will ask the board to do is to make it clear that wherever the school goes, it has to be within its existing boundary. And that's part of the reason that Mr. Waller was saying that we're doing this in 25, 26, so that any discussions on Elephants Fork, for example, that doesn't start until 27, 28, we now still have 2 years to make sure that our city is clear with that. So we don't believe that any of these adjustments for if a school is going to remain on the current location, Kilby Shores and Forest Glen are so close together, that boundary would basically still be the same as right now. Elephant's Fork may be a different story, depending on what negotiations between the city and the school board take place. But to your point, 'cause I think I know what you're getting at, this also means this will eliminate any options of combining schools. This will eliminate that. Our goal is to try to keep the demographics within 10 to 15% of their overall division's demographics to address the needs that Mr. Waller had talked about with the pressure that we're getting from the Department of Justice. I think what he said was extremely key, school board, about the one-to-one for any kids. We also, to the previous question that Ms. Byram had, we're going to have to take a hard look at waivers. We're going to have to take a hard look at that to see what adjustments would have to be made, including potentially any families that might be grandfathered in for some things. That was some of the feedback, Dr. Buck, that we received from some of our principals when we had this conversation today. So that's going to be some topics. That's kind of my roundabout way of answering your question. That's going to be some topics that we are going to have to hash out. But the one thing that I can confirm with you is this is going to be existing based on current enrollments, current school locations. All elementary schools are within middle school boundaries. And if there's going to be any schools that would have to move, we have to make sure it stays within the zone that the board votes on early this summer.
Madam Chair, I have two questions. First question I have has to do with transportation, because I know right now that is a hot topic for us. We are struggling to move kids from point A to point B. How are we going to address this adequately so this doesn't snowball further? You know, I've received so many phone calls from so many families about issues having to do with transportation. You know, kids not being picked up, kids not being dropped off until way past their drop-off time, never being picked up. So in considering this plan, I want to know, what are we going to do to mitigate that part of this? How are we going to fix our transportation struggles?
So, Dr. Brittingham, as I mentioned earlier, the first thing is we know that this is going to shorten our transportation routes, which has been a huge challenge, especially in the southern part of the city, a huge challenge in the afternoon, to your concern about students being dropped off late. The second part is we also had 2 to 3 drivers that were specifically designated just for M2M. So now those drivers come back into the general pool, which now means we now have more drivers to do our other routes. The third part was what I mentioned earlier about when Mr. Littlefield and the team was working on these lines, we made a conscious effort to not pass existing schools. So we believe that's also going to be an assistance. When we first had this program or this concept that was coming up, we had Mr. Privet with us at the table. And Mr. Privet also contacted his drivers to give us some suggestions on some of the boundaries that Mr. Littlefield had discussed. So one of the main things that you've heard Mr. Waller say, that you've heard me say, is transportation is a main driver of this. It's a main driver of doing this. The pressure from the DOJ, 3 more drivers that will be coming back into the general pool, which we will believe will help. And that also helps our sub pool as well. So we think that transportation is going to be a huge benefit from this.
My second question has to do with all of this data that we will be collecting moving into this 25-26 school year. If the board is going to be expected to make a decision, when will we have real-time access to data so that as we move forward, we're not waiting until a presentation or a meeting. We are in real time receiving what's being collected, and we can start wrapping our brains around and being prepared to govern over this with excellence.
We can add an information item for our average daily membership that shows the breakdown per school. That will give you a good, basically, monthly snapshot. As we know, that also changes day by day. As Mr. Littlefield mentioned, February 20th was the cutoff date for this presentation, so that's about 3 weeks ago. So Dr. Bird will make sure that we include average daily membership. Ms. Littlefield, I know that Ms. Lafferty sends that to us, that we'll use basically for the average for the month, so the board can kind of be able to see that.
Is there a possibility that this data can be placed or aggregated somewhere, like in a Google Doc, where we would have real-time access to it so that we could be up on what's happening, not just on a monthly report, but on a weekly report? If we chose to go and watch and monitor, how is this data progressing? What is it telling us, and where do we need to go with it?
That's your third question? That's your third question,
I'm
not your.
sorry.
So just real quick, Madam Chair, if I don't mind. Dr. Brittingham, I think your request could be met, but it's going to change. I mean, there's no need for the board to monitor something daily. Throughout the school division, we always have peaks, right? We have, on average, 150 to 200 more students at the beginning of the year. Then we have another peak at the beginning of the calendar year, and then it begins to taper off. So you won't see that big of a change if I'm talking about 100 students over 19 buildings. You may see plus or minus 5 or 7 to 10. Once you would know that we would have some adjustments if I communicate with the board that I have to add a teacher. I have to add a teacher at a particular grade level or at the secondary level because the class size has gotten above the threshold. So after we put the information out there for the month, if you have some additional questions about a particular school, that could be something that we could address on a one-to-one basis.
Thank you so much. We will now take a recess and we'll be back by 7:15.
You want me to wheel you to the bathroom and you just keep your legs crossed?